Good evening to our task force members, our guests, and our community. We are the Durham Community Safety and Wellness Task Force, excuse me. This is our March 8th, 2023 meeting. I'm not sure which meeting that is since we started, but it feels like maybe meeting 30. I don't know. Just a feeling. We've been at this for a while. We are totally committed to bringing to you, when this is all said and done, a document and a story that's going to tell the story of this community and the story of our values as a community around safety and wellness, and hopefully some wins and some suggestions of how we continue to be victorious in this fight. I'll turn this over to Marcia to speak more about our values.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I just love having a shared value, because values, as you know, are they were not given and they cannot be taken away. We just have them. It's marvelous. And they're also the qualities that make us our best selves. So tonight I offer the value of perseverance. When Xavier said maybe meeting 30, perseverance came forth from my, and gratitude. I'm going to combine those two. So gratitude and perseverance. How does that sound, y'all? Thumbs up, thumbs down? Bravo. It is so good to be with you all. I respect you so much. And I'll send it back to you, Xavier.
We want to take a few minutes just to make sure that if there are any announcements, that's good for the task force and for the community that any task force members are holding. We take some time to do so now. I will kick it off with a reminder from Dwayne in our meeting yesterday that this is Social Worker Week. Many of us in our jobs may be in contact with social workers, particularly those of us in education, for instance, who have social workers working embedded in our schools. My immediate family, everyone has at some point in their career worked with social work here in Durham. So I have a great bias towards social workers. But we just want to honor the work, because we know that they are a very important part of keeping this community safe and well, because they are amongst the first responders who are charged to do so. So we want to wish all of our social workers in this community, regardless of where they land and how they're charged, we want to thank them for their work. Any other announcements?
I'd like to add on that, Xavier, to especially highlight and thank our own clinical response team, the HEART team, from the Community Safety and Wellness Department. That team is less than a year old and has been making huge impact with regard to seeing the most vulnerable in our community. For far too long, people who have been afflicted with various types of mental or behavioral challenges or drug use challenges have been ignored or treated like criminals. And here we have a group of social workers and other support who are seeing the humanity and the dignity in these neighbors and ensuring that their dignity is preserved at all time, and that the best is given to them with regard to the supports and the resources they're ultimately connected to. With that said, I also want to highlight the department that the HEART team is based in, the Community Safety and Wellness, the Community Safety Department, especially because this task force has worked so closely with that department, especially the Crisis Responders Roundtable. And so we can't acknowledge these social workers without acknowledging the work and the fruits of this task force, because this task force has in fact contributed a lot to what we have today as the HEART team in Durham. They're pioneering, they're doing a great job, and my hat's off to them. And, I encourage each of us here to continue to support the department as well as the HEART team. In addition to that, Marsha Xavier had asked me to request that we provide some sort of lunch or breakfast for them. And so I've sent already the request to the city manager. So we're waiting for that permission. And once that permission is granted, we will fed them hopefully on Tuesday next week. And if any of you want to be a part of that, we will let you know. But yes, we were lifting up the heart team. Thanks, Xavier.
Roger.
That's so awesome. And on that topic, I'm part of an organization that is part of a slew of organizations and houses of faith and neighborhood associations and agencies and institutions across the city who are calling for Heart to be expanded citywide, 24 hours. The pilot has just been absolutely inspiring, and we'd really love to see it grow. So here's a link I'll put in the chat for hosts and panelists, and for the public who will be reading this later, who'll be seeing this later. You're invited to visit HeartDRM, HEARTDRM.com to sign the petition to expand Heart, and please invite any house of faith, small business, organization, agency, or neighborhood association you're a part of to sign as well. Oh, that's so great to hear. Alejandra shared in the chat that educators have been passing on the link to sign as well.
Thank you so much, Maju. Any other announcements before we move forward? Okay, I don't see any hands, so we're going to move to our next agenda item. We have two more agenda items for tonight's meeting. One is a presentation and analysis of the SRO roundtable listening sessions, and then the first reading of a program recommendation from that same roundtable. So I will turn this over to our research assistants. They have been doing amazing work with all of our roundtables. I'll present to you at this time, Jaquel Adams, Amaja Andrews, and Rose Worth.
Thanks, Xavier. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and then pass it over to you, Amaja.
Okay, sounds good. Hi, everyone. My name is Amaja Andrews. I'm one of the research graduate assistants for the School Resource Officers, or SRO, roundtable listening sessions. So we're just going to go through a little bit of data and insight. It is pretty long, so we're going to ask to hold all questions to the end if possible. And I'm going to go ahead and dive in. So next. So for our listening session, we found 8 major themes, which is like staff capacity, collaboration and communication, building conditions and security, restorative practices, surrounding community, mental health and trauma, trust and care, and SROs. So this will speak overall to the question of how can there be safety in schools beyond SROs? So these major things are showing the overall, like what has composed of what safety looks like and care within the school system. So our listening session by the numbers, we had 16 sessions overall. There was 13 plus hours of just awesome content that we went through. And there was looking at 5 stakeholder groups. So we had our principals, teachers, support staff. So that can include like counselors and just youth or students within the school system and parents. And so our first theme is for staff capacity. For each one, we're going to talk about bright spots and pain points. Bright spots are basically things that are just be like what's going well, that were reflective and spoken up by different stakeholders. And then pain points are things that can be worked on or like challenges that have been observed. So regarding staff capacity, things that we saw that was going well were particularly with smaller schools, they're able to have a better student-teacher ratio that allowed for more one-on-one attention overall. And then a lot of pain points was just like staffing shortages with either teachers or not there or not having enough TAs. Overall, also just larger class sizes in many of the schools, so they're not able to be as attentive or be able to reach everyone, and just shared staff. So nurses, counselors, instead of them being able to come in or have like a daily schedule, they might only be able to come in once a month or every couple of weeks. And overall, just an overburden with teachers and staff. And so we'll also be highlighting different quotes specifically that stakeholders had discussed. So for the first one, in terms of something positive, just mentioning like the presence of administrators making a large impact. This is very specific since not all schools are fully staffed with administrators. And then for our second one, something for improvement, just there needing to be more support for everyone, teachers, parents, and students that make a big difference. We can go to our next one. So with collaboration and communication, some really good things that we saw was like teachers being able to communicate to parents about issues, and this allowing parents and students in policy making and different changes they want to see in the school and pain points. There being a lack of communication from school to parents, shifting or unclear policies, there not being enough ways for parents to be involved or like present in the school system, or teachers not hearing from other staff about student issues. So there not being a full collaboration with communication when things occur with the student. So with the first one, something that we saw was really positive that a parent brought up was the teacher particularly being able to have great communication and message them whenever something occurs so they can be informed about their child, while something that was negative or challenging brought up by a parent was there needing to be more buy-in. And so by doing that, needing to empower the voices of students so they can co-create narratives with teachers and administration to reflect the community they want to see within the school overall. So for building conditions and security, there's another thing we really saw. A bright spot was like there being cameras at school entrances, like Ring cameras, so they can see the people before they come into the office to communicate. And then for pain points, not having working locks on the bathrooms, random people wandering onto school grounds sort of being open, like an open campus, buildings that are falling apart, and just no spaces to do counseling or therapy. And so on this slide, you'll see some of the negative things that were brought up specifically, like a teacher being addressed or talking about how students have came to her about basic utilities needing to be repaired to increase safety. So particularly the bathroom locks so they can actually close the doors. And then just physical barriers in terms of space. So even if they were able to get more therapists in the school, where would they be able to hold that space to talk to the students? We can go to the next one. Other things we saw was people mentioning the open campus, and like just outsiders having access to walk on. So a principal bringing that up, and like from the student expressing how the campus feels safe, it feels unsafe itself because people are able to walk on. And so next we'll be looking at restorative practices for our bright spots here, providing common language. Also, like it's best when done proactively and not reactively. So you might hear some things about circles that will bring up addressing issues without suspension, giving students a space to share their thoughts and feelings, while pain points to be a lack of training and buy-in, personnel with training unable to implement practices due to shortages. So if someone is designated to work with restorative practices, they might have to go to a classroom when there's not a sub available. It feels just like ISS, but with a new names, and that goes more into the training piece as well. And it doesn't apply to teachers or staff, but only students. And so like one of the bright things that a teacher brought up was common language, teachers being able to really buy into that. And so when conflict arises between teachers and students, and not just students and students, allow for the restorative practices to be used. And another thing in terms of a negative point that was brought by the teachers was it basically feeling like in-school suspension for people who are supposed to be trained for restorative practices, them going to the room and they're just monitoring the students instead of there being like collaborative restorative work being done. And so lastly, a really bright point that was brought up by a student in terms of restorative practices is being able to have the opportunity to work like from your teachers in being able like to have that communication there to allow for progression and also having like more structure with it.
All right, so I'm going to take us through the last 4 themes. And I know we're going through fast, so we can go back to any of these slides. We can also send them out afterwards. We just want to get through the major points. But one theme that came up a lot amongst teachers, but also amongst youth a fair amount, was just that issues in the surrounding community and the neighborhoods around the schools in Durham are coming into the schools. And I don't think that'll be a surprise to anyone on the call. So some like bright spots within that theme would be mentorship, clubs, other resources in the community also being supportive for students in schools. But then on the pain point side, just that all of those issues that are happening outside of schools, if a neighborhood doesn't feel safe to a student or a teacher, if Durham doesn't feel safe, that is coming into the schools as well. So on the positive side, you'll see the quote on the top that's talking about a specific mentorship program that a teacher thought had been particularly helpful. And then the quote on below, you can see some of the bolded parts, just the teacher talking about like the anger specifically and other things, altercations in the community coming into the schools as well. And that's something that really affects sense of safety and physical safety in schools. Mental health and trauma obviously is something that came up again and again across all of the listening sessions. So bright spots were, people calling out where there had been practices that are particularly promising across schools. So kind of just holistic acknowledgements of students, being real about the things that are affecting their lives and the traumas and that they're going through, especially with the pandemic over the last few years and issues again that are happening in the community. People called out the co-located mental health programs. There were some pros and cons, not around the program themselves, but just the availability of that program. And then mental health programs are just in general, like clubs being a place where there can be mental health and support for students in schools. And then pain points, there's still being stigma around mental health in schools, that there's still not enough space being held for the trauma that students and faculty and teachers and staff are going through. And that just that negative impact has for people's mental health throughout their days. So a positive, you'll see the teacher calling out those co-located mental health services and the success stories that they've heard from it. And then on the bottom, you'll also see talking about needing to have those services available in Spanish and just how absolutely critical this teacher thought having a person who's able to both identify the issues that are going on with students, be able to communicate that with the students, the teachers, the parents, and then actually able to serve the children as well in schools. And then we also wanted to highlight here just specifically what the youth were saying on this topic. So students are also calling out that they specifically feel like there needs to be more counselors, mental health experts to really have a workforce in schools to be able to deal with ongoing issues, but also to do that addressing of issues before they become a big conflict or potentially a safety concern. And then you can see the student at the bottom who's calling out some of the capacity issues that we talked about before, that they see how overloaded their teachers are, and that there are external things that are affecting not only them, but also affecting their teachers, and just how interconnected everything is when it comes to mental health and some of the capacity issues that we talked about before. So trust and care was also another thing that kind of just sort of suffused the entire conversation with both, I would say, especially students and teachers. Students sometimes brought up specific teachers that they found particularly impactful for their health and their sense of safety, and teachers that were caring, or, those clubs and spaces where they did feel like that they were giving support, or where teachers felt like they could give support and have some solidarity with other staff members or students. But also students and teachers were feeling like, students were saying like, oh, there are other students, it feels like they don't care, like they're not invested in the sort of safety and community of the schools, or that students feel like there are certain adults that they don't feel cared for and they don't feel that respect and trust from, and not having a trusting relationship whether it's staff member to student or staff member to parent, and that students themselves felt like they weren't always being trusted and that their voices weren't always valued in spaces. So you can see here a student saying that like they can really tell if there are people there who actually care about them. And on the bottom, you can see a parent just talking about how much they want their student and themselves as parents to have people that they feel like they can trust and talk to issues. And I think there was a counselor in another session who brought up, like, imagine what it would look like if every single student in Durham schools felt like they had an adult who saw them and trusted them and could see what they were going through and what an impact that would make on people's lives. Lastly, Amaja mentioned at the beginning, and she and I were the ones who conducted the listening sessions. That was the members of the SRO roundtable. We kind of came through on the back end to help analyze the data. But really, you can see in the way that the listening sessions were structured, it wasn't just a conversation specifically about the pros and cons of SROs. Obviously, that came up a fair amount across listening sessions, but it was really about, what are the things that create safety in schools. So when SROs did get brought up, there are some bright spots in terms of just like what function are SROs serving for students and teachers and principals and staff. And some of that is just providing psychological comfort, being the people in schools who sometimes have the most intimate knowledge of the surrounding community, and just in general being another adult in the building. The desire for more adults in the building was really strong from all quarters, helping dealing with physical fights. In some cases, when SROs were viewed as like positive forces, they could be seen as mentors. But the sort of flip side of that is a lot of times there was skepticism about the training of SROs and working with youth, that there's not a lot of supervision of SROs in schools, that they can abuse their power, and that things can go really poorly if they're not from the surrounding community or seen as part of the community of the school and the neighborhood. So you can see a principal calling out like how they specifically rely on SROs to step in for fights. But you can see one of the parents speaking about the kind of like, want the SRO there in like the worst case scenario, but don't even feel necessarily that they would want an SRO to be there to like intervene in fights, that they're worried about that potential for abuse of power. And then, of course, the student voice in this is really important as well. And you could hear in the listening sessions, youth really wrestling with this question and acknowledging that for a lot of minority students, that they don't feel safe around police officers. So while it might provide psychological comfort to some, that it's really a source of fear and tension for others. And then you can see the student in the second quote just talking about the desire for some type of peacekeeper or some type of other person in the school to be able to deal with fights and resolve conflicts without some of the things that we've seen from SROs of invading people's personal space or the potential for escalation into violence, and just the desire for a different type of peacekeeping adult to be there in schools. So lastly, and I won't touch on this too much, but if people have questions, we can go back to it. We also were kind of tracking not just those pain points and bright spots, but also like specific moments where people kind of called out that either an intervention did matter or had the potential to matter quite a bit. So just wanted to call out some of those moments that came up throughout all of the listening sessions, the sort of those student to student conflicts, when traumatic events happen, that sort of moment before a situation blows up or starts to escalate, when students transfer into schools and kind of what the onboarding is to like bring a person into community, that moment when a teacher enters a classroom, and then those moments before students come into their school and sort of their experience at home also being an area for kind of intervention and lots of moments that matter. So that was a lot. We'll pause there and I'll kind of hand things over now, I think, to Jesse and Nori and the other members of the SRO roundtable, but we're also happy to talk more about the analysis and answer any questions. And I also just want to call out Jaquel, who couldn't be here tonight, but who was very much a part of the team and critical in putting together this presentation and doing the analysis.
I'm holding space just in case anyone wanted to offer feedback response to the RAs. Go for it, Mike.
Well, it's a question about, the potential additional uses of all this great information. So I'll ask the question and any of you can answer it, because it seems like, from what I gather, you gave people an opportunity to talk, and boy, did they want to talk about lots of stuff, because I guess no one had really asked them and given them that space. So are you planning on sharing all this great information that you gained from the listening sessions with the school board? And maybe a sort of a softball question, might a potential future proposal from your roundtable be listening sessions like this ought to become a regular part of life in the Durham Public Schools, either at a school level or a district level? Not for you guys to have to go do it, but seems like regular listening sessions involving parents and teachers and students is something we could recommend the Durham Public Schools commit themselves to on any number of topics.
Yeah, that feels congruent with the program recommendation that we plan to present.
Yeah, it seemed very, very similar to that. That's why I asked.
So that isn't something explicit that we've named. I think it feels important to honor like everyone's limited capacities. And I know what it took for us to do this lift, like to make this lift and actually have these listening sessions over the course of several months. I want to name and lift up Tyler and even previous task force member whose name is failing me in this moment. Y'all know who I'm talking about?
Tanya,
thank you. And Tanya, Alec, who was a part of our roundtable for several months until he transitioned to the youth roundtable. I mean, it was a huge lift. So I think we've definitely thought about a series of policy recommendations that we hope to offer in our final report that we'll all work on. But I think the program recommendation that we're making for wellness retreats is an offering that actually incorporates a lot of listening inherent throughout the experience. So yeah, more for that soon, real soon. Any other questions or comments for the RAs?
Just want to say, well done. Thank you. I can't imagine listening to all that listening. And thanks so much. Beautifully done.
I have a somewhat specific question, and tell me if this isn't the right time for it, if I should just email this to somebody, but I wondered about the co-location model with, I think that's what you called it, with external therapists being available on campus. And I think I heard you say there were pros and cons of how that had been working in terms of availability. And if you had a moment to just share a little bit more info about what that looks like what have people been able to access the therapeutic services they need on DPS campuses?
I can speak on that just a little bit. From the feedback we received from some of the teachers, it was effective for some students. And where the negative piece came in was having to actually go through like insurance. So that making it not as accessible in terms of cost. And especially if a student particularly may not have wanted their parent to know. So having to go through the paperwork procedures is what created like a disadvantage in terms of access from some of the things that I heard.
And
is this happening in lieu of a school counselor? Is this happening like in places because there is not a school counselor?
There's minimum people who are on campus as school counselors, or they have to be shared between different schools. From what? Sorry.
It's not in lieu of school counselors, and it's in addition to. It's a separate outside contract that DPS has for this program of co-located mental health services and Alliance Behavioral Health. So any different providers that offer that and as a part of the program. So it's not in lieu of, it's in addition to.
Thank you.
I was going to say something, but it looks like Alejandra said that she can speak to it firsthand as well.
Well, I think everything that Amaja and Ms. Lewis said, yeah, is spot on. It is in addition to. I know that a lot of the people who come in services for our students, at least at Brogdon, are like just finished out their social work programs or need like hours. You need like some practice hours, is from what I understand. One of the barriers like we're finding is what you mentioned in your presentation, Amaja, the language barrier. And so then we like refer our students out to like El Futuro, but then El Futuro in Durham is, has way too many people. And there's a fee there. So there's a barrier then in the larger community.
Thanks for all of this positive feedback. We've done our best. And again, I just echo thanks to all of the RAs, including Jaquel, who couldn't be here tonight. And I'm really eager and excited to share about some of our just core observations that led us into this particular recommendation. So before I share my screen and get through into the recommendation, I just wanted to name these core observations that were just naming the need for support, the need for imagination, and the need for healing. I think these observations kind of helped me personally, and in conversation with Nori and others, they seemed to resonate and capture all of what the RAs just presented in terms of the themes and the data from our listening sessions. And so a word on support, it was just very clear that people care. There's no doubt about that, but they can only do so much. And there's a clear lack of resources, not pointing the finger to blame people, but to reckon with the responsibility that we have collectively to hold space for young people in school settings, and to also care for the adults and the staff that are, committed to serving young people in that way. And SROs can't do it all. We don't want to create a dynamic or encourage a dynamic where SROs are being asked to do things that they're not really responsible for, or they're not trained for. And so recognizing that more support would go a really long way. In terms of imagination, it was just very clear that it was hard for many community members to envision other ways of being with one another and engaging with SROs or thinking about safety that didn't involve policing. We had a set list of questions that we asked everyone. So we weren't just kind of spitballing it or making up things as we went. We came up with questions that we asked all of our stakeholders. And that was something that came up regularly. And we really wanted to see people think beyond it being more than just being for SROs or against SROs, right? But like, how do we come together and imagine safety in a way that feels comprehensive, that feels sustainable? I want to also highlight something that I know we've talked about here, both today and previously, but that punishment by another name is still punishment. And that for us felt like another factor around imagination, that just because we might be saying the right thing or using the term that is cool right now, restorative practices, as was mentioned, I think, Rose, you shared this point that like, if it still feels like ISS, or it's still people are, if we're defaulting to that kind of dynamic, where do we like invest in people's like psyche to imagine like, oh, this actually isn't what we're saying it could be or should be. And again, I think going to this concept, this concept and observation of a need for healing is taking seriously that like people are hurting. And I know it might be trite to say, but it's something that I do believe. Hurt people hurt people. But I also believe that healing people are committed to healing people. And we know there's not enough people on site. There are not enough people in the buildings. And Alec can back me up on this. We often heard folks talk and use war language. You know, we're in the trenches. Teachers are in survivor mode, right? And so if we take that seriously, that we see students are triggered by the presence of SROs, we contrast that with teachers who are actively in survivor mode. They're feeling overworked and underpaid, and they're doing the best with what they got. It's inevitable that they are going to make mistakes along the way, right? They're going to unintentionally escalate a situation that maybe if they had more support, maybe if they had a different set of resources, maybe if they had that training, you know, or that teacher mentor, you know, to come around and be able to intervene in a way, we see a different set of outcomes. And so that really led us to name the desire for some kind of investment in corrective experiences that offer care, address issues of harm, and really give people tools to manage with what's happening, whether that is like a concrete skill or even something that's more abstract in terms of like someone's emotional capacity to manage their behavior, to sit with hard emotions. And so the wellness retreats really feel like a concrete program recommendation to provide that. I'll mention, being mindful of time, that again, we have a set of policy recommendations. That's the term that we've been using, that we plan to present in our final report for all of the municipal bodies. So for city and county and the school board, of course. And I'm happy to share more about that, but want to save our time for this first reading of our program recommendation. I'm going to share my screen. You'll be seeing the most up-to-date version. It's a living document, and it's continued to change as we've been meeting with consultants and other community members. I want to also just be transparent and say at this point, I was going to pass the virtual mic to our community member and fellow roundtable committee member, Cecilia Polanco, to talk about the wellness retreats and this proposal, but she's not able to be here right now. I think life has happened as it does.
I'm sorry, Jeff, she's here.
Oh, is she? I didn't see.
Yeah, she's in the attendee mode, so she now can speak if she'd like.
Oh, yeah, and she's texting me, I'm here. Okay, great.
Hi, folks.
I love you so much. Thanks for being here. You pressed your way, beloved.
Yes, made it.
So, as I was saying, I'm happy I can drive for you if that's fine, or do you want to share your screen?
Yes, can you drive and can you set the stage for me, please?
Yes, I'll do my best.
Thank you.
Yes. So yeah, we'll go through this proposal. Y'all should be familiar with this template. Yeah, I think we're really excited to share more about the wellness retreats and how we think it's a way to build on a lot of the bright spots that we heard mentioned, you know, hearing feedback about the value of teachers and other adults that cared, the value of actually putting into practice the restorative practices, again, not just by word, but really by action, being able to invest in care that felt trauma-informed, that normalized conversations around mental health, social-emotional learning, wellness, and the like. We feel like the mental health retreats can be an active experience to really help people embody that in real time, both being able to learn, but also put it into practice and experience that. So Cecilia will share a little bit about the wellness retreats. We'll go through this document and then can have more space for questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Jesse. I'm glad I was able to be here with y'all tonight. I'm here representing both Pupusas for Education and the Durham Public Schools Foundation. I work with both organizations in collaboration to put on the mental health retreats. At this point, we've put on both mental health retreats for youth, just for students, and for adults and educators. We've had retreats for middle schoolers, high schoolers, teachers, administrators, and parents. Other adult allies as well have all been part of the space. The Durham Public Schools Foundation, through Whole Schools, the Whole Schools work that's happening there, mental health in the schools, has prioritized mental health. And so through our collaborations, we've been able to host mental health retreats together. And so, yeah, that's what we're proposing. That's what we're proposing now to this group, and we'll propose through these recommendations is the funding for more retreats so we can hold this space together with more youth, students from Durham Public Schools, and also for adults as well, because that's part of the whole school approach. It's everybody in the school building, you know, the students, the teachers, the administrators, and also parents, their experience. So the estimated full cost that we have in this proposal is for $100,500, and that would be to implement 6 retreats. Through our experiences, we've been learning what more robust things are needed in order to provide this space. So yes, we're hoping to be able to fund 6 scalable and replicable wellness retreats for DPS stakeholders. Through this proposal, thinking about 2 for middle school youth, 2 for high school youth, and 2 for adult staff and administrators. And each retreat would hold space for 20 participants, and community members, adult allies, as you might hear me say, serve along with P4E and DPSF staff, other sorts of organizations, mental health professionals, and other folks to help make this space possible. And so to tell you a little bit more about the retreats, it's a high structure, high support environment. So we schedule what the whole weekend is gonna look like. Folks know what's going on. High support is that we have a lot of hands on deck, ready to provide whatever is needed. And it's really a space where people can experience what it's like to have all of their basic needs met in a very intentional, thoughtful, and invested way, both resources, financial, other people's time, how many people we have who are a part of it, all of that investment goes into it. So that people actually have an experience of what time and space is to think about your wellness, experience wellness activities. That gives you a little bit of something to reference, I would say. Because oftentimes people are like, oh, I didn't know what to expect coming into this space. But we've received a lot of great feedback and word of mouth referrals, and a lot of named need for it. We need this. When can we do this again? That's how we know we've done a good job. If people are like, when can we do this again? So it's a really great environment for wellness. Like I've told folks, like it's not a mental health intervention sort of space. It's not a crisis intervention sort of program. It is community led. It is community rooted. For us just to experience what community wellness and healing can look like when, there's other people in the room who also have experiences lived experiences of we all have mental health. We all have varying degrees of wellness and mental health illness. And so in this space, there is no judgment. There's an abundance of whatever you need, to see what, what does it feel like to be held by a space, to be seen and validated for your experiences, and to learn also coping skills, positive coping skills for how to regulate and how to take care of yourself. So that's a little bit of that. But yes, this kind of addresses a need to equip more people with skills, whether it's adult allies, youth themselves to help support their peers, other youth, or teachers to learn skills to support other teachers. Learning some skills for regulating themselves and their own well-being that they can share with others. And
Cecilia,
this space,
just checking in, would it be helpful for me to go to like the overview document
of the itinerary?
With the whole schedule? Just, I feel like you were kind of speaking to some of those kinds of things, or I can just keep you on this page.
Yeah, that could be, it'd be good to take a glimpse at that so people can get an idea of what does that space actually look like.
Right, because you were speaking to that. Hold on.
Yes. Yeah, so we can take a look at the itinerary, to see sort of what the experience is like.
Here we go.
Thank you, Jesse.
Is this big enough, y'all? Okay.
Those of us with bifocals could use a little more.
Okay, a little more. I'm gonna try.
I'm gonna speak for my generation.
Where is the button to do
also
this?
My generation.
No, that's an add-on. Oh, here we go. There we go.
Thank you.
Okay.
Awesome.
Thanks for making space
awesome.
for that. So, Ceci, go for it.
Yeah, thank you. So this document will give you a little glimpse into sort of what goes into making this happen. We take all our processes of like registering folks, making sure we've got permission, immediate release, COVID liability stuff. We usually provide COVID tests as part of care packages for students. The goals of the retreat are building community, connecting students with mental health professionals, resources, and skills. A big part of it is that students, we reference some things that say that students need 5 trusted adult relationships. I also tell adults that we all need 5 trusted adults, and how readily can we identify those people in our lives. So it's for relationship building. It's also to have a space to think critically, and raise some awareness around mental health, destigmatize it, and encourage students to ask questions about it. And, sometimes students are as direct as like, how do I deal with depression? Or, what is mental health? How do I know if mine is okay? So it's to connect them with people, caring adults in the community who have training, who have skills to share. It's very community centered. So, it's put on by people who went to Durham Public Schools, alumni, people who are now working in Durham, working in nonprofits, different organizations that serve youth, students, the community at large. We have artists, restorative practice folks. We have people who do farming and agriculture. We have people who cook. Like we approach health and wellness through all the angles. And looking into our itinerary a little bit, the first night's really about getting grounded. We introduce folks to what mental health is with some mental health myth busting. We have an adult open mic where adults perform poetry, music, any sort of expression to model vulnerability and prepare the youth for their open mic the next day. And so high structure, like we were talking about. And then we have a pretty full day Saturday, from yoga in the morning, always good food. That's one of the things we want people to walk away with, that they ate well, they were taken care of. And then we go into morning sessions that have to incorporate a lot of skills. What does even a 10-minute walk in nature do for our brain? What is stress, the different levels of stress? What's good stress look like? What does toxic stress look like? We go into HRT class. Here would be a little bit of harm-free zone, a little bit of talking about, what safety means for us. And from those conversations, folks almost never mention guns or police when they talk about safety. Then we go into other sessions like poetry workshops. We do identity workshops. Like I think middle schoolers especially are going a lot through sort of like, who am I? Figuring out what they like, what their interests are, their gender, their sexuality, what spaces they belong to. So we explore a little bit of all that. We do Zumba, so moving the body. How is body movement a form of removing stuck feelings and of bringing relief and comfort to ourselves as we work through our emotions sometimes. And then again, more good food. We try to bring in different cultural foods too. So youth get exposure to different types of food. Like we've done a chapstick class, or we've done herbal hot chocolate. And we go into the youth open mic, where the youth host this open mic where they share some of the poetry they've written or dance that they do. And it's their time to shine and be celebrated and appreciated in this smaller group where they get to have that attention and that celebration. And Sunday's one of the most heartfelt days, as we go into either some sharing circles or affirmations. Affirmations is just a period of time where you get to be affirmed, you get to be seen, celebrated, and it often brings people to tears to be acknowledged in that way, affirmed in that way. And some folks are like, this has never happened to me, like we've heard you say like, oh, my parents stopped telling me they love me in middle school, like, so just hearing positive things is really impactful. And then we go into, some evaluations and things of that sort. But in this weekend, we spend less than 24 hours together. And it is an immersive experience where students walk away having a glimpse, students and even teachers too, of a space where a lot of investment and intention goes into it for their benefit, for them to receive, that can contribute to their wellness and their healing. And, part of that might be that they now maybe they're a little more open to reach out to a therapist, or they are thinking about who are those adults in my life that I can talk to, or, something like that. I've been fortunate enough to have some follow-up with students from our most recent Neal mental health retreat, Neal Middle School. And just this morning, we were having conversations about things they wish their parents knew about them, and songs that they would share with their parents that would help them understand how they feel. And they are very aware and already having deep conversations about their wellness, about depression, about anxiety. And so they need the spaces in order for that to be heard and for adequate referrals to be made. One thing about that I'll mention is that I'm not a mental health professional myself. I consider myself an ally for that field. I do have some training and I'm always looking to learn more, but that just goes to show that like it takes a large organization of allyship and really community to say, if you need someone to talk to, I'm here, but if you need a therapist, I can help you find one, or if you need a social worker, I can help connect you to one. So I think that community is really what helps foster that wellness, and also even recognizing that we're in survival mode enough to get out of it and to explore what thriving could look like for us. So we have that proposal for 6 retreats. We've added some components as we've learned. I think we have about 5 or 6 retreats under our belt already. We've learned that we need more adults in the space. We hear that from the schools as we're already. We need more adults present to field students, especially middle school students have more energy than high school students. And also lodging, because we would have some adult allies stay overnight, and some would leave, but we want to be able to hold everyone in that space. So we have some additional lodging, food needs, stipends for people involved, trying to make sure this is as equitable community engagement as we can make it. Really thoughtful and intentional, like I've been mentioning, investing the resources, people's time, people's energy, care kits, other sorts of supplies, just, so people walk away really feeling like, whoa, this, like, even if we didn't know them, like that we really thought about them and took them into consideration. That's a big part of healing, is having empathetic witnesses, like people to see you, to really see you in your pain and your healing and your joy in all of it. So this is really one of those spaces that a lot can come out of. And even with the impact that it has on someone in just a weekend, that has a ripple effect in the lives of everyone that they're a part of. And the way that they're like, when can we do this again? When is there another one? I'm going to tell my friends to come to this. That word of mouth referral is so powerful, because that's trust. If somebody I trust tells me this is a good idea, and I trust them, then I'm more likely to be about it and sign up for it and go and receive some of that benefit and community in that space. So thanks, y'all.
Thank you, Cecilia. I just want to hold space and check in with you, Nori. Is there anything that you wanted to highlight or mention?
No, I honestly wish I did, but I think y'all did a really amazing job of capturing everything and sort of what we've been thinking and how we want to sort of uplift the work Cecilia is doing.
Yeah, great. This is our first listen. We'll have a second listen next month, a second reading, but would love gut reactions, questions. Mike, I hope you can see exactly what we were imagining and how I think it speaks to some of what you were saying around the importance of listening. Folks get heard here in a way that feels really powerful and person-centered.
Yeah, and one of the questions I had when I first read it, amplified by your comment, is this intended as a kind of a one-off of these series of wellness retreats that hopefully the school board would buy into and make a fairly regular? You're only asking, let's do this first series for this cost, but is the sort of implication that when they demonstrate their usefulness, this would be something the school board would commit to with some regularity? Because by definition, as students graduate and go, this is something I think should become a permanent part of the life of the Durham Public Schools.
Yeah, so there are a couple of things that I could say to that. Nori, Cecilia, feel free to chime in. I think in our recent conversation with Megan Gonzalez-Smith, who's the director of DPS Foundation, just consulting with her, I think it's important to lift up that this has already happened, right? It's been piloted as a part of the whole school's effort. Papooses for Education does retreats, but in partnership with DPSF, they're putting on retreats for DPS stakeholders, particularly at Neal and Southern. And so our hope is to see that scaled in some demonstrable ways that feel strategic and measurable, but also like effective and responsive to like what's been happening. For instance, with the recent incidents at Jordan, thinking about even the state of urgency performance at Hillside, what would it look like to be able to provide something like this for folks at Hillside or Jordan? Right now, there's not an option like this within the model. And so it feels like a way to actually just test this out for a wider audience and hopefully see it the wellness retreat is a part of a larger approach. So even lifting up, like last night, we, and when I'm saying we, I'm lifting up the whole school's team, and several community members gathered for the Mental Health Ambassadors program. And so that's another component of school's approach. And it's really a chance for people who have gone to the retreats, either as a participant, as an adult ally, or other community members that are participating in Whole Schools movement, to figure out how to widen that impact and amplify that influence, whether that's within the school setting directly or even outside of it, to think about who are the people that could offer care, who are the additional people that can offer services that would relate to the needs that are being felt here. So there's a lot happening. I think this feels, as Cecilia mentioned, really anchored in community in a way that feels healthy, and it's allowing us to kind of start off smaller, and test things and see what it looks like, and see it grow and evolve in a way that feels healthy. So if we get to the point one day where DPS is, doing a number of retreats for each middle school or a high school context, we hope that will be commensurate with what is happening in that context, that we don't want to see something that's just like, let's do the same thing for everyone, when they may not have that level of trust. They may have a different set of needs. And so it just feels important to do this in a way, again, that feels scalable and measurable, so that if we get to, and we're making that decision, there isn't just resources within DPS, but there's a community surrounding it that shows up, that there will be ambassadors that are ready. Cecilia has mentioned this when they were testing it, I think at Neal. We want to start this other program. Neal was like, that's great, but we don't have people to do that. And Cecilia's immediate response was, we're not asking for more people. We're going to bring in the people. And these are adult allies and other community members that have a clear investment and have expertise and capacity and assets to offer. And so again, doing that in real time feels like a process that is sometimes slower, and sometimes smaller, but can be that healing, can be that embodied experience that can then be sustainable. Yeah.
And I think I appreciate that context, but I think, the principal audience eventually for this proposal will be the school board members, who are well aware that this is part of an ongoing process. To that point, I think maybe something that could make the proposal potentially even stronger would be perhaps a little bit more detail about the demonstrable evidence that these retreats have already produced, not a new evaluation system you're presenting to evaluate this pilot, but the results that it has already demonstrated. The one other thing I saw is, as the proposal is written, the needs that the proposal addresses. The proposal addresses the need to equip more DPS stakeholders with necessary skills that SROs are unable to provide due to limited training, experience, or capacity. But much of the meat of it is about the youth retreat, which appropriately has been and almost entirely focused on youth, although parents and teachers could be part of it. But it would seem either to adjust the wording, or perhaps work in how the current youth wellness retreats could be adapted, expanded, adjusted to accommodate for school counselors and others who are coming not just to work on their own mental health. You get what I'm getting at? But I definitely. You don't want to lose the community. So, you want kids and parents and teachers in the same room together, sharing that space and learning about each other's experience. But it would seem like if you could build in some also time for them to talk shop with each other, for want of a better term.
So to interject and be clear, or to clarify, the template that we shared with the logistics and the spreadsheet for the budget is modeled after youth, and that's named in the proposal. The adult retreat looks a little different, right? You don't need adult allies to chaperone and stay overnight. So there are some differences there, right? But I think the intention is to create this this protected space for middle schoolers, for high schoolers, for adults. So each space would adapt to the needs of that audience. So some of what you're saying like wouldn't happen in that way. I think if I'm imagining at least what I recall seeing take place with the middle school retreat that I was able to be a part of, those conversations were centered in serving the middle school youth, right? The adults that were there were really there to hold space for them. In contrast, adult staff, classroom teachers or social workers or other folks employed at DPS, that space felt and flowed very differently. So I know that's not as clear, but that can be something that we make clearer by the second round, perhaps. I saw Alec, I think, come off mute, and then Samuel, I noticed your question in the chat, so I want to make sure we get to both of those. Alec, do you want to share?
No, that was unintentional. Sorry. Thanks for noticing me, though.
Okay. Love you, mean it. Samuel, so is student registration for this program first come, first serve, or will the participant slots get divided up among the schools? That's a really great question. Cecilia, can I pass this to you? I think you have a better sense of how registration happens than I.
Yes, I think from when we've had larger sort of district-wide retreats, we've been a little more intentional of like what schools we want to work with and working with counselors to see if they can make recommendations. But it is a lot nicer in my part of my dream is, to have retreats that are school specific, but also that are open. And I also think it's good to think about students attending multiple retreats, so not just one and done, but like what have I learned and what relationships have I built a few retreats in. So we've, like, for example, with Neil, we had over 50 students register for the retreat for 20 spots. So for that showed us that there's need and demand for us to have at least two, if not three. And so from the other ones that we've had that were larger, it has also been nice. It has been both nice to see, spaces where all the students are from one school. Some of them don't know each other or they're from different grades. Some of them do. And also other retreats where students from different schools are seeing each other. So I think it could be part of whatever the strategic approach could be. For example, my most recent recommendation for DPSF is to hold a Hillside, a mental health retreat for Hillside students, given some of the recent events happening around gun violence and trying to create that space for grief and some processing, some joy. So there's pros to both having sort of more niche spaces and more wider inclusive spaces. So I think it might be just what are the times asking for and what are we responding to?
So the short answer is that it depends. And I think it's trying to be responsive to what the needs are and what the capacities are for the folks that are making that request. Samuel saying he knows some Hillside students that would love to participate. Great. I just want to name very clearly for the record that based on the budget that we put together, one retreat, we estimate that will cost $16,750. And so the request is to fund 6 retreats, right? 2 for middle school stakeholders, 2 for high school stakeholders, and then 2 for adult stakeholders in DPS. Again, it feels important to note that this is a part of something that's already happening. DPSF is already fundraising for their entire whole schools approach. And we feel like it would support the work that they're doing to support DPS if there are additional funds set apart for the retreat. So if that $100,000 is coming from the school or coming from the county, that's another 100,000 that they can redirect for other components of the whole schools approach. So we're focusing on the retreats for this program recommendation. But of course, I think if as we continue doing work, if we identify another program recommendation that we feel like we can make and that feels specific and concrete and strategic, that we can really pass that baton well and it'll be received and ran with successfully, then we're happy to make that. There's some possibilities for that, but again, I think we want to do our due diligence before we present to this body. But the request again would be 100,500 to cover costs for those 6 retreats. I'll lift up again some of the conversations that we have had with consultants and are planning on having. I'm really looking forward to some of the conversations that we'll get to have with folks in the community who happen to also serve on the Whole Schools Advisory Committee. These are folks that are working in Alliance Health, that are working in the county, that are working in Duke Center for Child and Family Health. We've already gotten to speak with some former student youth staff. We've gotten to connect with other city and county folks. Looking up Laura Khalil in the Office on Youth. They've been really supportive. Nori knows Laura well, and they've continued to show a lot of interest in what we're doing, but also other parent advocates. We're really doing our best to try to get a diverse and representative set of consultants to offer their expertise and feedback on this particular recommendation. So that's continuing to happen, and we'll continue to kind of shape how the program recommendation evolves by the time we get here again next month for our second reading. Go for it, Manju.
This is incredible. Thanks so much for all the great work that's gone into this proposal. Feels very inspiring to just have been hearing about how impactful those retreats were over the last couple of years, and get to hear this idea about broadcasting that work more widely, and thinking about it too as like a first step in a more positive direction around safety and wellness for young people in Durham. Just wanted to echo what I was hearing inside of Samuel and Mike's questions around scalability, and just wondering if in that second reading, when you bring it back, whether there might be something about scalability that you might want to add to the proposal. And I've been looking over this stuff from the Whole School Safety Plan, which came out of Chicago last year. I wondered if y'all had been looking at that model too, where they too were thinking about wellness and training as part of the roadmap towards moving beyond SROs. And it was like Chicago Public Schools in partnership with 5 community-based organizations. For folks who haven't looked at it, that might be an interesting model to look at for some of the kind of scalability questions, because it seems like some of the training stuff started smaller and then ended up being district-wide.
Yeah, that's the first I've heard of that particular model. I'm happy to receive it and look it over and learn more. I know in our process, it felt really important to keep our focus on what's happening in Durham, not to neglect what's happening in other places. But that was some of the guidance I know I received early on from several community members and decision makers. They really wanted to have the data focused on Durham and think about the partners here and what they feel like they have capacity for and imagination for, and that feeling really, really important to assess and leverage in whatever we're trying to do. Cecilia, you often say small is all. I feel like that's a reference to emergent strategies or something like that, right? Are you there? Cecilia might have had to step away. But yeah.
Yes, yes, Jesse. Yes, you're exactly right.
So yeah, so I think that's really kind of been our roundtable's approach. Have that focus, and I know that that comes with its own sort of limits. So it's great to get additional perspective. That's why we're here presenting it. So just wanted to be transparent about kind of the calculated risk we've taken, and that it's been one done with thoughtfulness and care. Thanks for that, Manju. If there aren't other things, I just want to use the last little bit of time we have to mention our policy recommendations.
Oh, Jesse.
Oh, please go. Yes.
Yeah, before you switch to policy recommendations, I was trying to give space for everyone else to give their input and feedback. And I know that I've talked with the roundtable group and with yourself. Just wanted to weigh in. I think this proposal is amazing. I think that it's been done with such care and considerations from what you've heard in the community, and painstakingly hosting these listening sessions coming out of COVID and doing as much gathering as you could do. It's just a lot of effort and work towards that. I want to appreciate those who have come in after we've gotten through it and done the coding with those themes. Thank you for that presentation. Like, I love data to drive the directions where we're going. I love the perspective you've taken from this. It's not about, again, and this is what I said from the beginning, we need to look at what does safety and wellness look like as a whole for our students. And it cannot just center on SROs here or not here. It's not that black and white. And our communities coming from those different perspectives. And you all have captured that well, even in your presentation. Like, it's not about, is what they don't have in their training. So we want to be able to add this. So I think you've done an incredible job in this presentation, in the gathering, in the community engagement. I hear you, Manju. We want to build capacity around it. Right now we're talking about 60 kids who would not have otherwise had this type of wellness support out of our 10,000 students altogether. I cannot remember if it is concentrated. I'd gotten distracted a second. Didn't know if it's concentrated in 1 or 2 schools. 120, thank you. I don't know if it was in 1 or 2 schools. I know 2 middle schools and 2 high schools, but will it be the same school? And if there's anything that you can share about how's that going to translate to academic success? Now, I come as a licensed clinician, so I know that the same way we need to feed children, that they can show up and not be hungry, we need to take care of their mental health so they can show up with clear thoughts and clear feelings, work through conflict. I understand this, but I'm thinking about those who are looking at, I just need to educate. How is this going to translate to that? And I think that you're changing the culture and climate. I would suggest considering targeting those students, if it's going to be a certain school, to be able pulling this is probably going to have to be done through research and accountability, but being able to pull the student surveys, climate surveys, to see if there's an impact there from the feelings of belonging within the school or feeling supported, or even looking at the panorama data. Now, I'm not sure if there's a partnership that could be done with the school to specifically get the panoramic data for those who are a part of the retreats. So I know you have your pre-test and the ACEs work happening, but maybe consider partnering with the school in those 2 areas as well. So they're seeing that direct connection. And then the last thing I'll say, if you have any more details about the ratio of how many licensed clinicians in those community members and how the community members are trained to be community health workers, if that's a part of it. And then first thing when I'm looking at overnight, and I didn't think about this when you first shared it with me, just safety of the kids and, throughout the night. And I've been on the chaperone detail before, overnight trip with teenagers, and it is not for the weary. So just being able to share a little bit of those details as well. So I talked about 3 or 4 things, but hopefully you followed. If you had any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Cecilia, I'd seen your hand up and just wanted to check in if you were going to respond to any of those comments.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I love all of that. That is exactly where we're thinking around deeper partnership with other organizations and thinking about scaling. As we scale, we really want to be able to capture, the impact, qualitative and the other one. And also, the different metrics. We have looked at panorama data. And we want to be able to kind of make all those things line up so that we can see what those changes are, not just in them and like what we see in them in the weekend, or, what might be different from a pre and post survey, but also what could we end up seeing, year after year changes from a student who started as a 6th grader who experienced mental health retreat and, maybe over the years, what those changes in the panorama surveys could look like around self-efficacy and around a sense of belonging in the schools. So yeah, we definitely want to make sure all that stuff lines up, and really appreciate your perspective as a clinician, as someone who practices it, is seeing that aspect of it too. Thank you.
Yeah, what I was going to add to is, I know in our effort to review other reports that have gone out, I know DPS, I want to make sure I named this correctly. The DPS strategic plan talks about providing a safe school environment that supports the whole child. And so that for us was the sort of validation. And of course, the language is spot on with DPSF and the whole schools approach. But thinking about, I think the sentence that we pulled out was, here it is, implementing research-based cultural frameworks to support the social, emotional health and safety of students and staff. That's language specifically pulled out from the strategic plan. And in terms of numbers, it would be 80 students and 40 adults of the 120 that we would see supported in this way, and recognizing again that is not the entire sort of 10,000 or so, but recognizing as we continue taking this kind of small is all scalable approach that allows us to work within the capacity of our community and see that grow over time, so that, the people who participate in the program in the retreat now might be able to come back later and be an adult ally or be a mental health ambassador and pour back into the program in a way, again, that feels sustainable and generates that healing, right? That healing people are healing people. Councilmember Caballero.
Thank you. I answered one of my own questions, which was, I see the attachment now. I was wondering if if we had the actual document, not just the shared screen. Just one, y'all, and this is really a question, thinking about long-term funding and as things, I'm just going to imagine that this is going to go amazing. There's going to be all kinds of partners. It's going to go to the scale. It's going to have all the things, right? And we're down the road a little bit, let's say 2-3 years, right? So that the kind of merging of inside and outside, because I think that the right container with it being in Durham Public Schools Foundation makes sense to me. But at some point, I can imagine the kind of having to be in and out of the schools and it living, in the school budget. So I think one of the things that we will want to think through is if and when that day happens, having it just be directly allocated from the county, so that the charter schools don't get a percentage, because then that just limits the capacity of the program itself. And I know board member Lewis can speak to that way more than I can, but I know it's been something that's been raised continuously. It's like there's these amazing things that happen. And Xavier, I know you can too, right? There's the amazing initiatives that happen, and then the resources actually really diminished because of what our school system is forced to do with charter schools. So as the advocacy grows around this, and I think it's amazing. I know that mental health for our students we hear it even just in the city around the work that the Office on Youth does, right? Just how critically important what a moment we're in right now. But just wanted to name that kind of like being really strategic around the funding source down the road.
Definitely. It's interesting too that you mentioned the charter school element in our last roundtable committee meeting. One of the RAs was just wondering about like, well, what are the experiences within charter schools, right? And like, are they investing in law enforcement? Are they investing in student services? How are they spending their dollars, and what does it look like to like explore that? And then I'll add briefly in a conversation that we had recently with one of the consultants, they asked some really good questions about like, in alignment with what you're imagining, right? If this is happening, culture shifting school-wide across the board, what can happen during the school day? What can happen within the classroom experience? And are there elements of the retreat? Are there elements of the whole school's approach at large that can be embedded into the day-to-day experience, both again for students and for staff? I really want to lift up the need to support the staff as well, and recognizing that when we take care of them, they are going to be in such a great position to continue to offer the support, because so many of them do have their hearts in the right spaces and places, but they are in survivor mode. And I've already made that point. Trustee Lewis.
And just real quickly, thank you, Javiera. I couldn't put words to that, but I think that funding stream is a correct funding stream because it's very much mental health, but it's specific for DPS students. So I have actually put in the chat too, one other point I was going to make. In the presentation that Cecilia, another thing I want to share real quickly, I'm so happy to see you leading this work as we served in the safety and the race equity task force. And now to, again, seeing this continue to manifest and grow, it warms my heart. I'll say though, but when you show the agenda, how to, again, I'm a student, I'm experiencing this retreat off campus. How am I translating this back to what I'm receiving here, back to where I'm going into the school system? How we, again, connect that to the school system. And Jesse, when you just named it, our educators, faculty, staff, we ourselves, adults, need this support too. So the fact that you just named that, like that needs to be elevated. This is why it's being housed with DPS Foundation for DPS students and faculty, but also being long-term, again, thinking, how can this mental health work be supported by the community at large as we're looking to scale? But that's later down the road. But for all those points, thank you, Javier, for bringing that up.
No, it's super. It's right on time, and we're definitely holding space for those conversations now. I think that's a part of the healing. That's a part of like growing our imagination to think ahead and be proactive and think about how these retreats root to a systems level and shift the culture in that way. And with the experience that I was able to be a part of, just being adult ally in the retreats that were held for the adults at Neal, 2 of them came back to our mental health ambassador training yesterday. So I'm convinced that like this is a solid intervention, and it's one that feels sustainable, is one that feels person-centered, and it has the potential to shift the culture, and it won't be just like from the top down, but it'll be from the bottom up in a way that, again, feels measurable and sustainable. So happy to have more conversations with decision makers and other community members who are interested in shifting the culture in that way. We won't do policy recommendations. We don't need to do that. That wasn't even on the agenda anyway. So I'll pass it back to Xavier. Marsha.
Okay. Well, thank you all. This is great. And thanks for first great reading. If questions come up, can we direct them? We'll direct them to you, Jesse and Nori, and go from there. And we'll revisit it next meeting. And it is 7:32. Would y'all be willing to take a second and just give us in the chat a word? What are you taking from this time we've had together? And until we meet again, quickly, because it's been great. Inspiration, hope, healing, gratefulness, joy. Totally gratitude, wellness, interconnectedness for me. We are nothing without each other. Beautiful. Peace. I would say caring, just to be talking about the students and families of Durham just warms my heart and gives me great hope. And with that, we will answer these questions and do more next time. Until we meet again, go forth and prosper in peace and safety and plenty.
Just real quick, and I'm sorry I missed announcements and I was late.
Please.
Don't forget the Hearts Open House on the 20th.
That's
please,
right.
please. Okay, thank you all. That was it.
Thanks. Bye.